Hello, my name is Brandon Newbert, and I have received a lot of requests on how to plan a hiking trip through the Swiss Alps. And while this video will use the Haute Route as an example, these tips and tricks can apply to any hiking adventure in the region. My journey on the Haute Route was an incredible experience that changed my life. And today, I want to share with you some of the ways that you can prepare for your own experience. I want to talk about how much it costs, different resources you can use when planning your trip, the types of places you stay, food, preparation, your packing list, and then I want to wrap things up with some final thoughts. So we have a lot to cover. Let's jump into this. Now, the first thing that people typically want to ask about is how much does the trip cost? And that's totally fair. We spent 3 weeks in 3 different countries. We flew from the United States to Europe. You know, it sounds like it's going to cost a lot of money. After tallying up all of my transactions on my credit card, Nathaniel and I each spent $2,500 on our trip. This includes all of our flights from Denver to London and then from London to Geneva, bus tickets, train tickets, other transportation fees, places to stay, our hotels, hostels, Airbnbs. All of our meals are included in that cost. All of our extraneous purchases. With that said, we were pretty frugal on our trip. We didn't spend a whole lot of money on, just unnecessary things. We didn't buy any souvenirs because anything that we buy, we have to carry. Another thing that really helped us out is neither Nathaniel or I drink any kind of alcohol, and so we didn't buy any wine or beer on the trip. And I think that's noteworthy to mention here when talking about cost, especially in Switzerland where it's so famous. So if you're a strong drink enthusiast, I would budget a little bit more money for that. And in some of these places where you stay, alcohol is expensive. That's just something that you ought to think about. And really, doing this trip for under $3,000 is very doable, and I'm going to cover a little bit more about the costs that we encountered throughout the trip. But all in all, $2,500 was a great budget for this trip. Now, the very first thing I want to recommend if you're planning your own journey on the Haute Route is this book right here. This is the Cicerone Trekking Guide from Chamonix to Zermatt, the classic walker's Haute Route. And this book has everything. It talks about hotels, hostels, and places to stay. It has maps and waypoints, distances, estimated time to walk from point to point, different historical places that you'll encounter along the way. I mean, this has everything. And everything that we planned on this trip was based out of this book. When you order this book, make sure you order it from the Cicerone website itself, because we ordered both of our copies from Amazon and we got previous editions. And since then, maps have been updated and become more detailed. Some of the paths have changed or the directions have changed, not dramatically, but enough to clear things up. And even the total distances in the updated book are different than this book. We found that when we did the Haute Route with the older copy, we were traveling anywhere from just 1 kilometer to even 6 kilometers further than what the book had told us we should expect. During our trip, I actually purchased the updated ebook copy and downloaded it to my phone just so that we would have the updated maps. But all of that said, this book in its older edition got us through the trip and it helped us plan everything out, and I don't think that we could have done it without this book. So I'm in no way sponsored by Cicerone. I mean, this is a product endorsement, but I'm not being paid to do it. But if you're planning on doing the Haute Route, I strongly recommend that you buy this book. It's going to make everything just so much easier. So now let's talk about our overall itinerary. I'm not going to go super deep into our itinerary because I've already done that in my movie, The Haute Route. It's an hour long. It talks about every single place we went, A to B, the terrain. It shows the terrain. There's great drone footage. So if you've watched it, you already know, or you have a pretty good idea of what the route is like. So if you haven't watched it, I would encourage you to go watch it so that you can get an idea of exactly what your itinerary can look like when you do the Haute Route from a day-to-day perspective, and the things you'll encounter, the places you'll see. It's very, very fun. But just in general, our basic itinerary when we were planning this trip included a day of travel from Denver to London, a day of travel from London to Geneva, an extra day in Chamonix before starting the trip, because Chamonix is a beautiful little town. We just wanted an extra day there to acclimate to the new time. After that, it was 14 days straight of going through the Haute Route from place to place. And then after the Haute Route was finished, we planned an extra day in Zermatt to do some sightseeing. We planned an extra day to get from Zermatt back to Geneva. And we also planned an emergency day. This emergency day was just kind of a buffer day where if we had any sort of emergency or where if we had to stop in one place due to weather or other concerns, we could do that. The final couple of days were spent traveling back from Switzerland to the United States. So in total, we planned 21 days for our trip, and that turned out to be just about the perfect amount for going there, completing the Haute Route, and getting back home. The Cicerone book does have a couple of different itineraries. There are different alternate routes that you can take. There are different side routes that you can take to go and visit different places. So if you wanted to shorten what we did, or if you wanted to lengthen it and do even more hiking, there are additional itinerary options in here. But the book does have a 14-day itinerary, which we followed pretty closely, and it was just about perfect for our athletic abilities to do this hiking, and also for time that we could spend away from school or away from our work. So after Nathaniel and I had bought the book, and we'd read it and we figured out how much time we wanted to spend, we started doing research on flights. At this point, we knew that it would take 21 days. And so we had a start date, August 6th, and an end date on August 27th or so. That was the dates for our thing. And we started looking for flights way in advance. And when I say way in advance, I mean our trip was in August and we were looking for flights in February. And I believe we bought our tickets in June. Tickets to Switzerland in general are fairly expensive, and it's hard to get a direct flight that goes from the United States all the way to Switzerland in Geneva without stopping. And so through our research, we found that there are a lot of flights on United that go from Denver to London. And then looking a little bit further, we learned that you can get inexpensive flights from London to Geneva on someone like British Air or Swiss Air. We originally planned, and this is totally up to you, we did run into problems doing this, but we booked our flight from Denver to London separately than our flight from London to Switzerland. And if you watched our movie, you know that we did run into a problem because of that. When we landed in London, luck had it that there was a strike in Heathrow Airport where we were supposed to depart. And so we were stuck in London for an extra day. But that's why we planned an extra day. We didn't know if we would have problems. We didn't know if our United flight would arrive late. We didn't know if we would encounter some crazy strike in the airport that would prevent us from getting to Geneva on time. It was incredibly fortunate that we planned that extra day in Chamonix. We ended up needing it before the trip even began, and we could start our trip on time. There are some great resources you can use when looking for flights. I recommend google.com/flights. This is a service that searches all kinds of different flights on all the different airlines, and you can even set alerts. So you can say from A to B on these dates. Let us know if there are any price changes or fluctuations. That helps you to jump on the different deals. But in general, flying between country to country in Switzerland is fairly inexpensive, and it'll cost between $75 to $110 to fly within Europe. So if you can just get somewhere in Europe, maybe not London, depends on where your international airport hub is, I recommend thinking about flying to Spain and flying to Switzerland, or flying to London like we did into Switzerland. That was a great way for us to spend money because our flights were only $550 for each of us. And that includes flying from Denver to London and London to Geneva and back, $550. Versus if we had tried to fly direct from Denver to Geneva, it was going to cost us about $1,800. So that's something you can think about when planning your own trip. It was also kind of nice. I don't know. If you look at my face in my movie, I'm pretty stressed out about being stuck in London for a full day. But we were really blessed and fortunate to be able to get on a flight the next day and continue our trip. And we got a little bonus vacation in London, which it was fun to see all of the history that lives in London. So next up, I want to talk about the places where you stay. Now, down in the valleys, you're going to stay in your standard hotel room, or you might get an Airbnb or something like that. But without a doubt, the coolest places where you're going to stay are in the cabanes and the berghouses. These places are cabins that are nestled way deep in the Swiss backcountry. It's going to be a cabin that's nestled at the top of a glacial canyon or at the base of a huge glacier itself, and you can hear the glacier snapping and cracking. Or another cabin might overlook a beautiful glacial lake, and they are without a doubt some of the coolest places you are ever going to stay in your life. And what's more is when you arrive, every single one of these has great amenities. You're going to take a shower and you're going to get cleaned up. You're going to put on some fresh, clean clothes from your pack. You're going to go down to dinner. You're going to enjoy a hot dinner with strangers, and they're going to be cool people just like you. You're going to go to bed in a shared room that might sleep anywhere from 4 to 12 people. You're going to wake up the next morning. Breakfast is going to be ready. And then at your leisure, you're going to pick up your sack lunch and you're going to head out the door and you're going to hike to the next place. And it's such a great deal. On average, we spent about $70 per night on the various places where we stayed. The other great thing about these cabanes is that they have electricity. You can charge your GPS watches or your cameras or your phone or whatever you need. Sometimes you have to use a token and you have a limited amount of charging time. Other times, the power is just free and it's available. Some of them are a little more expensive and might cost you $95 to $100 per night, while others were really cheap. We stayed in one that was $45 a night. Fortunately, the guidebook, like I mentioned before, has some great recommendations. I can flip to any chapter in this book, and it'll say something like, arriving to the Cabane de Moire, go to this website, you can book your place in advance, and it has all the amenities you need. Or it might say, when arriving in Sion, we recommend this, or this hotel as inexpensive or even some more expensive options. It all depends on the different places where you're arriving for the night. You know, you may have one option and you need to book it early, or it might be a town and you have a couple of different options that you can book. I recommend doing your research on each stop and making sure that if there's only one place where you can stay that night, that you book it early. Now, if you're nervous about spending the night in a room with 4 people or even a dozen people in it, I get it, but you gotta remember these people are the same kinds of people that you are. These are people that want to go out and travel and see the backcountry of Switzerland. And you'll frequently run into people that you've seen previously because they're doing the same route you are on the same schedule. But Nathaniel and I always slept well each night in each of these shared rooms. The bathrooms were always very clean, even though they were shared by numerous people. Now, I mentioned before that these places are way back in the backcountry, and I talked earlier about the price of different food like alcohol or things like that. You got to understand that these places really are in the backcountry. The Cabane de Proflerie let us know that they receive a helicopter drop every 2 weeks with all the food and the supplies that they need. Now, they're able to get water and they're able to filter water, but yeah, every 2 weeks they get food. And that's why the food can be expensive. I mean, you might spend $4 on a Snickers bar, but they had to helicopter that Snickers bar in every 2 weeks, and that's why it's expensive. So, just something to be mindful of. On the other part of that too, they do feed you. It's a hot meal, and it's usually pretty good. We never had one that we complained about. And let's be honest, after you've hiked 9 to 12 miles or however long you've hiked that day, anything's going to taste good, and it's always going to be delicious. And Nathaniel and I were always happy with the food that we were provided with for both dinner and for breakfast the next morning. And we frequently purchased the sack lunches from these places and brought them with us for the next day of hiking. The cabanes and the berghouses, those are the coolest places to go, and you're going to love your time spent in them. Before moving on to the next section real quick, the cities and towns are also really cool, and I personally recommend booking a place near a laundromat or booking maybe an Airbnb that has laundry amenities available to you. There were a couple of different times when Nathaniel and I would go to a laundromat, we'd just throw our clothes in, and we'd postpone hiking for about an hour in the name of just getting our clothes extra clean. But I'm going to talk more about clothing and packing later. But I think it's a good thing to note since I'm just talking about the places where you're going to stay right now. And I do speak highly about the people that you share your room with, but it's always nice after a couple of days in these community places to just have your own place for the night where you know it's going to be quiet for sure. You know, there's not going to be people snoring or getting up to use the restroom throughout the night or things like that. We always slept well in the hostels and places, but it was always nice to get our own place after a couple nights. And then just one more note before I move on to the next section regarding booking your places early. There are some places where you really should book them early. And once again, this book does talk about that. And it does give you links to all of the different hostels that you need to book. It gives you their website and even their phone number so that you can call ahead and you can book your place. Nathaniel and I tried to book every single place before we even got on the plane going to Switzerland. And that was a little hard. And some places weren't bookable either, like the Cabane de Proflerie. We couldn't book it ahead. We had to stay there, and so we just hiked in, and when we arrived, we were able to book a room for that night. I think it's unlikely that each of these places are booked completely to capacity where they can't take anyone. That said, I think it's always wise to call ahead, maybe 2 days in advance, and try and book a place, because while you're hiking, it's always nice to know that you are guaranteed a comfortable place to stay for the evening, rather than being concerned that they may not have room. So that's what I would recommend, and what I'll do differently in the future is, instead of booking them all at once before I leave on the trip, I'll probably try to book them along the way, maybe 1 to 2 days in advance, just to make sure they have room for me. In this next section, I'm going to talk about what you should pack. This is by no means a comprehensive list. I'm going to talk about the things that we packed and brought with us for our trip. You need to pack for yourself, and you need to, of course, pack anything that you think you're going to need. But here's what we brought. 3 pairs of underwear, 4 pairs of socks, 2 long-sleeve roll-up shirts, a pair of pants, a pair of shorts, 1 quick drying towel, trekking poles, camera equipment, water, your lunch, an emergency blanket, tent, whistle, water filter, things like that. Different toiletries like shampoos and soaps, charging cables, coats, rain jackets, 2 pairs of shoes, a travel sheet set, a headlamp, 2 different buffs that you can wear on your head or around your neck, 1 thermal shirt that you can wear underneath anything, and about $150 worth of cash. I do just want to touch real quick on some of these essentials. Some people may think it's interesting that we brought 2 pairs of shoes. In the cabanes, 2 pairs of shoes are required because you can't wear your hiking boots or your hiking shoes, whatever you wore, into the cabane in the name of keeping them clean. I don't know, I had just a lightweight pair of shoes that I brought with me that were comfortable. At the same time, when you stay in these cabanes, you need to have a set of travel sheets. These are kind of like a sleeping bag slip, where it's a tube made of sheet material. And you need those because the cabanes do not supply bed sheets for you. You need to bring them yourself. We did bring emergency blanket and tent. These are the really thin, lightweight foil things, and they pack into little tiny 1-ounce things. These are things that just never leave my pack based on my personal traveling experience while backpacking. And fortunately on our trip, we never even had to open them. But it was always great to know that we had them, because oftentimes we were in the middle of nowhere. And you never know if something's going to happen where you get injured. So having some kind of emergency blanket and some extra food in your pack and a whistle you can blow if you're in distress. Those are all great things to pack, a first aid kit, blister treatment things. Gotta pack things like that. Regarding a coat, we had down coats, and so they were lightweight, but they were definitely strong coats that we could use. And rain jacket is, of course, essential. You need good rain gear for trips like this, especially when you're backpacking through these high mountains in August. You need a good rain jacket. Now, we did only bring 3 pairs of underwear and 4 pairs of socks, but that's because we're doing laundry throughout the trip. If we had access to a laundromat, it was great. We generally washed pretty much everything whenever there was access to a laundromat. That brings me to a really important topic, that your clothes should really be quick drying clothes. I'll recommend cotton anything on this trip because it gets wet and it stays wet for days. And so this is one of the shirts that I brought with me. Every time I had to wash this shirt, I knew it would be dry the next morning, and that I'd either be able to wear it that next morning or I'd be able to pack it and it wouldn't be heavy. My pants are made of the same stuff. I knew they would be dry. Shorts are quick drying as well. Underwear is quick drying, whether it was spandex or just some lightweight material. But you got to make sure your stuff is quick drying because you're going to get wet on this trip. Now, it rained on us just about every day, and there weren't very many days when we didn't get at least sprinkled on. So having a rain jacket and quick drying clothes was essential, not just in case you get wet on the trail, but just in case you need to wash something along the way too. It's going to be dry in the morning, even though it was air drying. In total, each of our packs weighed 22.5 pounds, or just over 10 kilograms. And that was a very comfortable weight for the distances that we were traveling. We had everything we would need, no matter if we ran into heavy rain or bright sunshine. We were good, and it was a comfortable weight to carry for the rest of the trip. Other than that, I don't know that there's anything to really stress about in terms of what you need to pack. This book does have recommendations on things you should pack, and we followed it pretty closely and made our own adjustments as we went. One more small topic I would like to talk about is language. Now, I can't speak for every route, but the Haute Route is primarily through the French-speaking portion of Switzerland. That being said, most people speak English. The people that manage the cabanes and the hostels and the hotels, they're going to speak English. We did have a couple of instances where we needed to speak French,
Nathaniel speaks fairly fluent French, and he was able to take over and get us through. These books have a language portion at the very back, so in a desperate situation, you could always open up a map and point, or open up the phraseology guide and do your best, but I never ran into a problem, and I would be comfortable hiking the Haute Route at least, knowing that I can only speak English.
Now, if you've made it this far into the video, I'm jealous of your upcoming trip. I just have a couple of final tips and tricks for you for your trip. My first piece of advice for you would be to be flexible. Things are going to happen on this trip that you just can't plan ahead for. Earlier I mentioned staying in London for a day. We had no idea we were going to have to stay in London. We bought our tickets in June. We had no idea there was going to be a strike in the Heathrow airport for the day that we were there and that our flight would get canceled. But because we had planned ahead and knew that we would want an extra day in Chamonix, we were able to use that extra day in Chamonix instead on an extra day for that 24-hour layover in London, and it worked out perfectly. We also encountered some problems on the trail too. The last couple legs of our trip had to be canceled because of torrential rain that was happening all over the region, and so rather than sit and feel sorry for ourselves, Nathaniel and I canceled those legs of the trip, and we went to Sion, and we saw some of the great medieval history that lives in the museums there, and the amazing castle, and I was able to take an amazing picture in Sion. So on trips like this, you can't manage everything, so be flexible, and you gotta know how to turn your lemons into lemonade, and if you can do that, you're gonna have a blast on your trip. Tip number 2, you gotta be in shape. Nathaniel and I hiked 130 miles together, and it wasn't flat 130 miles either. We had 30,000 feet of climbing. This was a very difficult trip, and you gotta be in shape for it. I would go to the gym, and I would climb on the Stairmaster, and I would just go and go and go and go. But if you're in shape, that's great. You just gotta be prepared and know that every day you're gonna be ascending like crazy, you're gonna be descending like crazy, and that can be hard on your knees. And you gotta know that you're gonna go far, and sometimes you're gonna be a little rushed. You're gonna have to go faster than you previously thought. So you gotta be in shape. If you're gonna do this trip, you gotta be ready for the physical implications that it brings. With all this said, there are alternative forms of transportation available on this trip. If you have to, you can cancel entire legs of your trip in favor of taking a bus to your next location. You can even hike part of your trip on some legs and take transport for the rest. There are numerous places where you can hop on a bus and skip a descent, or hop on a tram and skip an ascent, and sometimes they're even included. In particular, I want to talk about 2 legs of the trip. The first leg of the trip is the climb from La Sage up to the Cabane de Montfort. That is a freaking crazy climb, and you'll read all about it if you buy this book, but it is a gnarly climb. It's not even very scenic is the thing. But in 2019, if you buy a ticket to stay in the Cabane de Montfort for the night, your trams are included, and they're free of charge. So we took the tram and went up to Verbier, and then we went all the way to the top of Montfort, and then we went down again and walked to the Cabane. It was a very great rest day, scenic day, where we could just relax on the tram, go to the top of the mountain and back down, and then walk to the Cabane de Montfort, and it was an awesome day. The second tram I want to talk about is the descent going from the Cabane de Moiry all the way down to Zinal. This, once again, is a gnarly descent, and it will shred your knees. For that reason, I cannot recommend hiking it because it is a very serious descent. However, if you have booked a stay in the Cabane de Moiry, then that tram going down from the mountain all the way down into Zinal is included in your fare. These are things that you're gonna learn about as you research your trip, but those 2 in particular, I recommend taking the tram. I'm not going to think any less of you for it. Maybe you think less of me for it, but my legs were much happier for the rest of the trip because we had made those decisions. And overall, my trip was just more enjoyable. Tip number 3, water. In every town, there are these really cute little water fountains where you can just fill up your bottle before you embark. The water's clean and it's safe to drink. You just got to fill up your water bottle. I recommend carrying at least 2 liters of water per person on this trip, because there are some places where there's a ton of water, and there are some places where there's no water at all where you can fill up. One of those is in the glacial desert headed toward the Cabane de Proflerie. Gotta make sure that you bring enough water for those really dry stages that you do, where you're just hiking way up high in the mountains, and you're going from cabane to cabane and there's not much water. I do recommend bringing a water filter so that you can fill up from some of the less cleaned water places, but at the same time, Nathaniel and I drank from a few springs during our trip and filled up our bottles from them, and we were okay. But if you're unfamiliar with what water is probably safe to drink and what water is dangerous to drink, you should probably bring a filter with you so that you can fill up your bottles safely and not get sick. And tip number 4, be prepared. I cannot stress again how important it is to have good rain gear, but not just good rain gear. There are other legs of the trail where you're completely exposed to the sun, but it's still cold. There are other legs where it's completely shaded, but you just need to be prepared for a number of weather things. That's why I recommended quick drying shirts with sleeves that can roll up pretty easily and stay buttoned up so that you can have them double as both a short sleeve shirt and a long sleeve shirt to protect you from the sun or keep you warm, or you can cool off a little and use it as a short sleeve shirt. And even though our down coats were a little bit bigger, they did stuff into a compact size and we were happy to have them. I also mentioned bringing emergency blankets. You know, if you get injured, little things like this can save your life. That's all I'm going to touch on. If you're planning the Haute Route, you're already probably a fairly experienced mountaineer and you know what kinds of things that you need to bring in order to feel safe.
So now that we've talked about how you can plan and prepare for your own trip, I'm excited for you. I am genuinely excited for you. The Haute Route was an experience of a lifetime for me. And there are so many amazing routes through the Alps, you can bet that I'm gonna do another one.
All of the planning that you do, all of the reading, all of the booking, all of the money saving and penny pinching that you do to pull off a trip like this is worth every penny and every second of your time. In the meantime, if you found this video informative, I would really appreciate it if you'd hit that like button in return. It really helps out. This is a new channel and I'm just starting to try and build it up. And so reading your comments down below or seeing if people like this kind of material is really helpful to me as a creator. I've been producing more and more travel and photography content as time goes on. And so if that interests you, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so you can see when I upload things in the future. But it's been great putting this together. I hope it's helpful to you, and I'll see you in the next adventure.